Well, Sheikh, thank you very much for receiving me in your home. It was a great discovery for me after I wrote my first book here that you have, to discover that from your studies of the Islamic texts, you come to basically the same conclusions as me and others come from perhaps a more materialistic approach. And I was very interested to take this opportunity to visit Malaysia, to come and visit you, because I don't believe in coincidences. And when suddenly you have people from very, very different backgrounds that come to the same conclusion, and I believe we're not the only ones, there are other people from even other faiths and other backgrounds that come to the same conclusion, that we are into a very important time of the history and the world. I was very interested to meet you and share ask perhaps some questions and share some ideas on how do you see this end of, maybe not the end of the world, but what I call the end of our world.
The end of history.
The end of history.
Yeah.
And I was very interested in reading in your book the point of view of an Islamic scholar on why we're getting to the point where we cannot continue the way it is.
Well, first of all, the pronunciation is Piero, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. My brother Piero, I don't believe that our coming together is by accident. That the Lord God it is who has brought us together. And I'm grateful to Him for this opportunity to meet with you. I've been reading your book, Survive the Economic Collapse. You got it? I've been reading your book, and I've been pleasantly surprised that your conclusions are not only the same as mine, but you have a more advanced thought than I have on this subject, and I'm learning. I'm learning from your book, and I have much more to learn from you. I think the proper approach is we all learn from each other. The second thing I want to say to you about the way we respond to your book is that the Quran teaches us that in the end time you need a particular epistemology if you are to read the world correctly and to understand why are we moving towards this critical moment when everything seems to be coming together for one catastrophic conclusion. And that proper methodology is that we bring two oceans of knowledge to harmoniously integrate with each other. One is the ocean of knowledge of external observation and inquiry, external observation and inquiry, and the other is the ocean of knowledge of internal probing and internal insight. You don't need the insight alone, you also need the probe. And when these two oceans of knowledge combine together and are harmoniously integrated, you will then have the proper epistemology for reading the world correctly. And I came to the conclusion from page 1 that you are not writing this book on the basis of one ocean of knowledge alone. I don't know whether you recognize it, that you've been blessed with internal insight, spiritual insight, and the Lord God provides to whomsoever He chooses that insight. So I congratulate you on this book that you have written, and I hope and pray that out of this meeting today we can collaborate in the future. And when I am no longer in the world, because you're still a young man and I'm an old man now, that my students, we have one from Switzerland right here. So we believe that the proper epistemology will lead us to a conclusion that history is moving towards a climax which cannot be explained without some insight into the subject of the Messiah. So, eschatology is important. Eschatology is important for understanding peak oil, for understanding the mountain, for understanding the fraudulent monetary system, for understanding a political system which seeks to impose world government on mankind. So one people will rule the world. The eschatology will explain why it is that we are now moving towards that military confrontation where the Western world wants to force Russia and China to their knees. You must submit. Even if the whole world has to blow up in nuclear war, we don't care. We don't care. Even if most of mankind must die, we don't care one bit. Our objective is that we must impose our rule over all the world by the hook or by the crook. And the Lord God in His kindness has sent us a Russia, which today says we are not going to submit. We will not bow. And no matter what you threaten us with, it doesn't matter, we're not going to submit. So we are heading towards a conclusion in which there will be an awesome military confrontation. The term Messiah was used to explain that it's all connected with the Holy Land. It's all connected with Israel. It's all connected with the Son of Mary, who was sent into the world as the true Messiah. And that they rejected him and they demanded his execution. And when they saw him being crucified on the cross, they boasted, "We've killed him. The Messiah, the Son of Mary, the messenger of God, the Messiah, we've killed him." All sarcasm because they rejected him. They say he was a bastard. And because he was not the Messiah, and because the Lord God promised he would send them one who would be the Messiah, and who when he comes would bring back the golden age when David and Solomon ruled the world. And Israel became the ruling state in the world. They're waiting for the Messiah to come. He was not the Messiah, so we're waiting for the Messiah to come. So there's a messianic age that is to come. And then came the Zionist Judeo-Christian alliance, which emerged out of nowhere, and which then swept the stage of history. Everything was pushed aside. All civilizations were pushed aside. And a new Western civilization emerged, commanding the stage of history, controlled by the Judeo-Christian Zionist alliance. And they are the ones who brought the Jews back to the Holy Land to reclaim it as their own. They are the ones who restored the state of Israel in the Holy Land. They are the ones who now are preparing to dismantle the United States of America so that Pax Americana will give way to Pax Judaica in the same way that Pax Britannica had to give way to Pax Americana. Pax Judaica cannot come until the world is depopulated. And that's why you have the big war that's coming, the nuclear war. So what remains after the nuclear war, the remnant of the world that will remain, can be more easily controlled by Israel. Israel must rule the world. And they're almost there now. They're almost there now. When the big war takes place, the US dollar cannot survive. It probably collapsed before that, if not with the war. The entire system of paper and plastic money will go. Electronic money will stay for a while. And who controls electronic money? The banking system. And who controls the banking system? The Judeo-Christian Zionist Alliance. They control it. So Israel has within her hands the theoretical capacity to rule the world, the post-Armageddon world. It is after that that our Prophet said that Allah, Almighty God, would create someone who would impersonate the true Messiah. So he will be born in Israel, and he will grow up, and he will assume the rule over Israel, and then he will declare to them, I am the Messiah.
Is that what you write? Al-Dajjal?
Yeah, Dajjal. Okay? We are moving towards this catastrophic end or conclusion because this is what he needs to be able to establish his monstrously evil rule over the world. This is what he needs. But the good news is that the world is created as a moral order, and hence truth and justice must always triumph in the end. It does not matter how few they are who stand up for truth and justice. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many there are on that side who support forces of injustice and oppression and falsehood. This side must win because the world is a moral order. So we have no need for despair, being demoralized, but those of us who come to the same conclusion belong to a fraternity, belong to a brotherhood. And we must combine our forces together with love and with mutual respect, and support each other and help each other, like your book is helping me. This is my answer to your question. Why are events moving towards this conclusion?
A very, I think, difficult question, perhaps, and one that I have difficulty to answer when people ask me, is to give a timing. And from your study and scholarship of the texts, what is your perception of when is this finally going to start to be in the conclusion time? When is this Al-Dajjal, this false Messiah, starting to emerge?
Fortunately, we have in our text that which helps us to formulate a time frame. We don't have exact dates, numbers of years, numbers of weeks and months and so on. And that would be ridiculous now. But we do have a long period, and then a shorter period, and then a very short period. That before Dajjal or the Antichrist emerges in human form in our world of space and time as a Jew in Israel, he will live on earth for 40 days, which is actually my book on Jerusalem in the Quran. That is based on that. He will live on earth for 40 days. But the 40 here is symbolic. Because one day would be like a year, and one day would be like a month, and one day would be like a week, and then all his days would be like our days. Good. I came to the conclusion that when his day was like our day, the world experienced Pax Britannica. Pax Britannica did not encompass the totality of a day which is like a year. But Pax Britannica emerged within that period of time of a day which is like a year.
Yeah.
And then came the second phase of Pax Americana, a day which is like a month. And then will come the last period of Pax Judaica, which will be a day which is like a week. No one, I believe, would say that Pax Americana has already ended. No. Pax America is still alive. For Pax America to end, the US dollar has to collapse. Okay? So we can form a kind of a time frame, looking at Pax Britannica, looking at Pax Americana, and accepting that we are now living at that critical moment in time when a day which is like a month is ending and a day which is like a week is about to commence. So we have a much shorter period of time still remaining when the Zionists are going to be moving with a pig-headed determination, whatever be the cost, to ensure that Israel becomes the ruling state in the world in place of the United States. I suspect that most of modern Western civilization is going to disappear because Western civilization has already served its purpose. They don't need it anymore. That Israel is going to come to the world with the new message that the world needs religion. Away with secularism, away with materialism. The world needs to come back to God. Look at the mess that the world is in. We are the people of God. We are the oldest of all. We will bring back moral values to the world. Get away with all of this rubbish that you had. A man marrying another man and having a marriage certificate. Get away with the feminist revolution. All that rubbish. That's the message that's going to come from Israel tomorrow. Old-time religion. Let's go back to that because it's a mess. In order to be able to convince the world. So having Western civilization around at that time with a discordant note would not be beneficial for Israel. So I'm anticipating Western civilization with the big war disappearing. What will remain will only be an insignificant remnant. Will not have a voice on the stage of history. How much time do we have before the big war? The Christians call it Armageddon. Our Prophet calls it the Malhama, the same thing. I think the Malhama has already started, but it has started by proxy. It is a proxy Malhama now in Syria. And if this is the proxy Malhama, you are not going to be able to bring any peace to Syria. It will not happen. This will continue and continue and continue, like a festering sore. The proxy war is already now in Ukraine. Neither side is going to back down. So from proxy war, you're going to move to the fireworks. How long it's going to take, I don't know. But the process has already begun and it is inevitable because neither side is going to back down. After the war takes place, the Malhama, then our Prophet has said that the next big event would be the conquest of Constantinople. That's why they changed the name. And that's why they made it illegal in Turkey to use the name Constantinople. Because they wanted to brainwash the world into believing that the conquest of Constantinople prophesied by Prophet Muhammad was the one that took place in 1453. But that's a lie. That's false. The Prophet praised that army and he praised that commander. We can't praise Sultan Muhammad Fateh who took the greatest cathedral of Orthodox Christianity and converted it into a masjid, to the eternal shame and disgrace of the world of Islam, to the eternal shame and disgrace of the world of Islam, to take the cathedral and convert it to a masjid. So away with that rubbish. The conquest of Constantinople comes after Armageddon or the Malhamah. He said that birds flying in the sky during the big war would fall down, indicating that they can't navigate, indicating that the radiation that comes from nuclear warfare will so corrupt and pollute the atmosphere that nothing can fly. So you no longer will have aerial warfare after the Malhamah. Warfare after the Malhamah will be on the land and on the sea, not the air. Western civilization has had the greatest military advantage over the rest of mankind because of the control of the sky. So it's going to be a level playing field now. The conquest of Constantinople will take place on the basis of an alliance between Muslims and Orthodox Christians. Eastern Orthodox Christianity. The conquest of Constantinople has only one military significance, only one, nothing else. And that is it's going to break the backbone of NATO. The Western world has maintained control over the Bosphorus for the last centuries. They did it through their friend and ally, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a friend and ally of Western Christianity. And Western Christianity used the Ottoman Empire to brutalize unjustly Eastern Orthodox Christianity for 500 years, enslaving their women and using their women as slaves in their harem. Lots of them Russian women. Taking Christian boys and converting them to Islam, and then training them to be the elite fighting force, the Janissaries, Christian boys. So the Christian Orthodox world had to fight their own sons. You see? How much time is there left before the Malhamah? We don't know, but we believe it has already started. After that comes the conquest of Constantinople, which will free the Bosphorus. The military significance being that Russia will survive Armageddon. Russia will survive the Malhamah. Because this has no significance other than the Russian fleet, navy, being able to pass through the Bosphorus into the Mediterranean. So we can tell NATO now, with confidence, we can say to NATO, Russia will survive the war that's coming. And the Russian Navy will be able to pass through the Bosphorus into the Mediterranean, and that is the significance of the conquest of Constantinople. It is after that that we now have the appearance of the Antichrist. This is the timeline that we have. I sometimes have to stick my neck out because people are demanding. Tell us how many years. So you sometimes make a fool of yourself by giving a time frame, but they insist on it. So about 20 years ago, when I was still in New York, I said maybe about 50 years from now. And they said I was mad. I was crazy. 50 years from now, Jesus will return. The Antichrist will be killed, Jesus will return. I said, well, 50 years from now. That was 20 years ago. They're not laughing at me anymore.
No. Yeah.
They're not laughing at me.
I'm not laughing.
No. So my guess would be that these proxy wars are going to continue. Russia is not going to be trapped into any reckless response. As Russia has responded so far very intelligently in Ukraine and very intelligently in Crimea, very intelligently. Russia has given them a tremendous slap on their face in Crimea. Yeah. It's the first time that the Zionist Judeo-Christian Alliance has received such a slap on their face. First time in 100 years that they got in Crimea. So they are bitter about it. They're bitter. And Russia is already playing her cards very sensibly in Ukraine. Do you notice the news that Chechen warriors are fighting? Yeah, Chechen. Because not all the Chechens were in arms against Russia. It was those Chechens from Chechnya who took weapons from Saudi Arabia, the Salafi, but the majority were Sufi. Alright? So these are the ones who are waging the jihad. And Putin was able to put an end to it, waging a bogus jihad with American weapons. But you have a lot of Chechen people who are not Salafi and Sufi. And these are the ones who are now being used in Ukraine. That's what the Western world did in Syria. That's what they did and are still doing in Syria. That's what they did in Libya. So Putin is paying them back in their same coins in Ukraine. So Russia is handling the situation very intelligently in Ukraine, and I'm very pleased about it. Russia will survive the Malhama, and the Russian fleet, the Russian navy will still remain a potent military force. My guess is maybe about 10 years from now, we may have, before the fireworks, the nuclear war. And after that, maybe another 15 years or so, a short period of a day, like a week, before we have the final encounter of Dajjal, the false Messiah, and the true Messiah returning to kill the false Messiah. And then we have history ending with the triumph of truth over falsehood and justice over oppression and tyranny. My answer was too long for you.
No, it's very interesting because obviously coming from a pure materialistic analysis of the reserves of oil, of the risk of collapse of the, as you said correctly, the bogus currency that the dollar, and not only the dollar, but most currencies, the paper currencies are going to collapse, and I think the dollar is the first one. In my opinion and my calculation, it's very hard that we can manage more than 10 years from now. And then of course starts the time that is going to be the struggle, the difficult times where a lot of people who are in the Western world, and I think that I understand what you mean by Western world, and I must say that probably most of the world is Western today in the way they live and the way we live. And also I could resent Western, but I don't. A lot of Europeans today, it's a minority, but a lot of them don't consider themselves anymore Western. We believe that what we used to consider the Western world is not anymore what it is today. I feel when people say, "You're the Western civilization," I don't feel part of it anymore. I don't recognize myself into what it is today.
That's good.
Even America, when I was a child, I used to admire a lot of things in America. But in the last 30 years, and maybe I was too young, but even before, this is not what, it is not freedom, it is not democracy, it is not, I think the war, the savage war on Iraq has awakened a lot of us to what is the real nature of this Western world, which is more an empire, more than the evil empire, as most empires are. And also write in my book, and also stick my neck out to say that in the next 10 years we're going to see this collapse. And as And then the question, of course, is, and I write most of what I put in my books, is how you survive into that collapse to hopefully what is going to be in the end, as you said, the triumph of truth and justice, and I believe certainly a better world. But the struggle is going to be difficult. And I was curious to have your opinion, because you write in your book Surah Al-Khaf, forgive my pronunciation, about the Islamic village, and from what I read is very similar to what I explain in my books as the sustainable autonomy base. So it's a different name, but certainly the ability to have autonomy in water, food, perhaps some energy as well as we need it, knowledge, ability to defend yourself, and the social ability to have a happy life with the people around you. Or at least that was my approach, and I was very interested to see how you see this Islamic village in this light.
Modern Western civilization, and those who identify with it and who support it, particularly in use of power to impose its rule over the rest of mankind, is a ship which is sinking. And all those who remain on board that ship will sink with it. Those who are living in the West and who recognize that this is a sinking ship have to turn to Surah Al-Kahf for the proper response. And of course it is that you've got to get off that ship if you are to survive. So when I speak about the end of Western civilization, I'm talking about the ship which is sinking, with those who are on board the ship. I do not include those who choose to get off the ship. You and I have come to remarkably so to the same conclusion, that getting off the ship means that you've got to get out of the cities, the mega cities of the modern world. That these are hopeless. Those who choose to stay in the mega cities, like Paris, should solve their problems themselves. Don't come to us. That survival, which is getting off the ship, survival, can best be achieved in creating sustainable micro communities in the remote countryside, which are self-sufficient, in which you produce your own food, and in which you strive and struggle to produce that which is healthy, good food. And again, it is Surah Al-Kahf which talks about it, that you must search for that food which is good and pure in this age. That you must have a source of water in order to produce food. And our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, has spoken about when you are unable to live as a Muslim in a macro-Islam, the Islamic state, power and controlled by Islam, then you should try to live as a Muslim in micro-Islam, Muslim community, small community which lives in accordance with Islam. When that also is not possible, he says, then at that time the best property of a Muslim would be some sheep that he would take with him to the mountainsides and to places where rain falls, seeking to preserve his way of life. for dairy farming, and because of rain, food crops. So you are dependent for water on the sky rather than under the earth. And He who created us can send water from the sky, rainwater. If we choose to get off the ship and to establish sustainable micro-communities in the remote countryside, struggling to produce food, which is what they call it, organic food today, but food which is pure and good and wholesome, and staying away from the radiation that comes from the cellular phones, and create communities where men would be men and women would be women. It's becoming increasingly difficult today to find a woman who's a woman.
True.
And increasingly difficult today to find a man who is a man. He prophesied that men will dress like women. He prophesied, our prophet, that men would dress like women in the end time, and that women would dress like men, and that women would be dressed and be naked. So, a feminist revolution which spawns a sexual revolution. But if a man is to dress like a woman, why would he want to do so? Answer: to attract another man. That's why. And so the end time is going to witness an explosion of homosexuality. And its corollary is lesbianism, which is the breakup of the family, breakup of marriage. Marriage goes down the tube. Alright? One of the first things that a man will have to do if he wants to dress as a woman is what? One of the first things he has to do. Come on, Gabriel.
Try to find the answer, Sheikh.
Come on, Gabriel. Come on, Gabriel.
To be human.
If a man wants to dress as a woman, what's the first thing he has to do? Piero can give you the answer because he got a beard.
Probably shave, unless you want to win the Eurovision.
The first thing he has to do is to get rid of the beard. Because the beard will give him away. The beard will give him away. The reason why the Lord God put a beard on the face of the male is to distinguish the male from the female. Yeah. So if a man wants to dress as a woman, the first thing he has to do is to get rid of the beard, which is why modern Western civilization, created by Dajjal, took the beard off the face. So today, women want men who look clean. And a clean-shaved man is a clean man. And a man with a beard looks dirty. That's the prevailing mentality today. Yeah. In the end time, therefore, we want to build communities where men are men and women are women. So the day will be day and the night will be night. And it's only when the day is day, and this is Imran the poet now. It's only when the day is day and the night is night that the day and night can be attracted to each other. Do you notice that when the day is coming to an end and approaching the night, what happens? What happens is the painted sunset, all the excitement. The sky is a riot of colors because of the electricity. The day is approaching the arms of the night. And then the day plunges into the arms of the night. That's the spectacular sunset. That's what we want between the male and the female in our villages. We want to restore that. This intense attraction. Intense attraction is not possible when a woman is revealing herself. No. When she shows you everything that she has, where is the attraction? It's when she's covered that there's a mystery.
Agree.
When she's covered, there is a mystery. Huh? And it's only when there's a mystery that there's excitement. Yes. That is why our Prophet, Allah's blessing be upon him, even when there are sexual relations, he wants to be covered. Use a sheet, use a covering. So that you save something of the excitement. Otherwise, tomorrow it's gone. It's gone, you don't feel anything anymore. And then after the day has spent the night, there's a time for sleep, there's a time for prayer, there's a time for love, and then there's a time to say goodbye, which is dawn. You following me?
Yes.
Dawn. Do you notice what happens at dawn? Different from sunset. In sunset, the day plunges into the arms of the night. But at dawn, the night is holding on to the day. She doesn't want him to go. So only one ray of light comes out, and then a second ray of light. Slowly, 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 he extracts himself from the arms of the night. We want to restore that. It's not just about growing food and having water and using real money rather than bogus money. It is also about rebuilding the male-female relationship and rebuilding the family and rebuilding the lives of children so children can enjoy being children once more. So maybe you want to continue your research in that direction.
For sure. For sure, it's very important. And
but you must be thirsty by now.
That's okay. I'm fine.
Yeah.
You mentioned the bogus money, and one of the striking that was something that I knew from my travels in the Middle East is the riba. One of the fundamental elements that is going to collapse the world is that the system of debt and interest on the debt has become, as it was inevitable going to come, to the point where it's so expensive that we are all becoming, whoever has loans, and it can be states, it can be individuals, companies in between, we are becoming slaves of the financial system, as you described before. And how can we, from your study, extract ourselves, because a lot of people are in this system not because they are bad, but because they've been lured into it. Like the snake has told us that to buy this house you must borrow money. To buy this car you must borrow money. And people haven't thought too much about it, and probably it's a mistake. But how can we remove ourselves from that very bad system?
Have you ever heard of the name of Alan Garcia? South America. I think it must have been Peru. Ecuador or Peru. Must have been about 20, 30 years ago. Alan Garcia decided that we will repay our debts in accordance with our capacity to repay. Forget about all the contracts we have with you and the financial obligations. We will repay our debts in accordance with our capacity to repay. And our capacity to repay will depend upon what is our income. So if you enslave us, you get no money from us. I think he said we're going to be able to pay 10%. whatever is our income towards our debts, not more than that. That was some creative thinking on the part of Alan Garcia.
Was he killed for that?
No, I think he was eventually overthrown and something like that happened to him.
That's the first step.
Yeah. But our response in Islam would be, first of all, that you have to have governments that will stand up independently, like Russia is doing today. A government which stands up to them, to the banking system and so on, to the IMF, to the Judeo-Christian world order, and decided we're going to put our interests first. We saw that in Saudi Arabia with King Faisal, 1969 to 75. We saw that in Pakistan again at the same time with Bhutto, when Bhutto and Faisal formed the alliance. We saw that in Venezuela with Chavez. We're seeing that in Bolivia with Evo Morales. Okay? From our perspective, the first thing that we will do is to unilaterally repudiate all interest obligations on loans. We're not paying the interest. Do what you want. However, we have an obligation to repay the capital sum, and we will do so. Number two, that we will repay the capital sum in accordance with our capacity to repay, based on the methodology of Alan Garcia. If you were to adopt such a policy, that means that you're on the road to freedom. They don't want you to be free.
No.
They want you to be enslaved.
Exactly.
So they're going to land the Marines, and it's going to be imperialism all over again. Yeah? Except this time we have Russia, and this time we have China, but not prepared to submit. I think that the recent agreement between Russia and China for the supply of gas over the next 30 years indicates, one of my students actually wrote to me with his insight, and I'm sharing with you his insight. I can't mention his name, of course. That what the Russians are doing is bypassing this part of the world which is military controlled by the enemy, to take a different route. If you have Russia and China in an alliance, and that deal is most certainly a very important pillar of an alliance, okay? And then you have an alliance with with China and Pakistan. Because when they did the Bin Laden circus, when they said they killed him and they threw his body in the ocean and then a big fish came and swallowed it, that's the way the story ended. The Pakistanis immediately decided that this is going to be used as a pretext to attack Pakistan. So the Pakistani Prime Minister flew immediately to Beijing, and the Pakistani President flew immediately to Moscow. Beijing responded with a response that absolutely shocked and surprised them in Washington and London and Paris and so on. China said what China had never said before. Never. China said an attack on Pakistan will be an attack on China. Full stop. Full stop. Okay? You don't ignore a statement like that. Alright? So if you have that kind of an alliance between China and Pakistan, and you have that kind of alliance between Russia and China, Do you notice the geography of the new supply routes that are now emerging? Bypassing this part of the world, where they control. They control the water, they control the air, they control everything. I therefore see a possibility of our what do you call it? Securing a new avenue of responding to them. Yeah. But why don't we can talk while we're having something here.
Thank you.
You have some orange juice there? Please, after you. I used to buy the Grappillon Rouge and Grappillon Blanc. Yeah. Bismillah.
Thank you. The reason I asked this question on the debt is because, and this is a question a friend Algerian friend living in the UK has asked me to ask you. I think it's a very good question. How, if a lot of us move, as I'm trying to do in creating a small community in the Swiss Alps, and as if you describe, you advise the people who understand Islam in the correct way to move and create Islamic villages, to have their autonomy in eventually these small communities, how can they avoid to fall back into the traps which seem also common in humanity, which is all the, I guess we call it sins, or all the bad habits? How can and where can they find the inspiration and the guidance not to fall back into traps?
Good question. I think we have to help each other in the same way that you are helping me with your book. That none of us is an island unto ourselves. No. That we in Islam have that which we can put to help. And so a Muslim village should not be an exclusively Muslim village. We should open our doors to Jews, provided they're not Zionists, who can live with us on the basis of mutual respect for each other. We should open our doors to friends, to Christians, to Hindus, to Buddhists. So the Muslim village would be a multi-religious, multi-ethnic community. And we show the world that we can live together. Then we, from the side of Islam, would offer to the others, this is what we have to offer to assist you. For example, the Quran tells us that men are allowed to have up to 4 wives. If the Quran is indeed the word of the one God, the inescapable implication would be that he who creates human beings must create more women than men. Okay? He must create. You turning away from my mangoes?
No, it's okay.
I am the one who did it, so...
I don't want to make them be stuffed, so I will take it.
No, you can't turn away from my mangoes. I'll put it on the camera there. Yeah, please, yeah.
Thank you.
So he creates more women than men. And then comes the Dajjal who teaches us that good men have only one wife. Monogamy is the new fashion. You can have as many monikers as you want if your name is Bill Clinton. That's okay. But you must only have one wife. Okay? The implication of monogamy. Of course, the official statistics will never tell you that. The implication of monogamy is that large numbers of women will no longer be able to get husbands. Okay? What are you going to do with this surplus women? Then Dajjal comes, number 2, with a feminist revolution which brings in its wake so many things that causes marriages to break up. So marriages are now breaking up as never before, sometimes 1 in every 2. And women are very emotional. I can't find the correct word. That when a woman has had the first divorce and then she's had a second divorce, now she's scared.
Yeah, of course.
She's scared. She doesn't want to go back down that road again. 2 divorces.
I think it's true for men as well.
Yeah. So you're going to have a very large number of women now, increasingly large number of women now who are single, who would prefer to be married but cannot be married. And then comes the third attack from Dajjal, and that is the cellular phones and the radiation and the damage being done to male sperm production with genetically modified food and sperm. And so the male sperm is too weak to produce a male child, and only females, baby girls being born. We already have the medical evidence for it. People who work for putting up the cellular towers, they report only baby girls. Only baby girls. So we are moving towards an explosion of a very large number of women in the world who cannot find husbands. How do we solve that problem? In our Muslim village, we'll be able to show to the other communities who are living with us, we have a way of solving it. That our Quran tells us that there are 2 categories of women with whom men can have intimate relations. 2, not 1.
Okay.
2. The first one is wives. But the law is that you have to maintain your wives' parity. If you give this one a Mercedes Benz, you can't give this one a Hyundai.
Okay.
No, something less than a Hyundai.
We presume that there won't be much Mercedes in the future.
Fiat. No, the Italians are not going to like me. In Malaysia there's something called a Kanchil.
Yes.
Alright? So you can't give her top of the line Peugeot and give her a Kanchil.
Okay.
Not in Islam. No. There must be parity, justice. And the Quran says that if you fear that you will not be able to maintain that standard of justice with your wife, then stay with only one. Well then what do you do with the other women? The Quran then speaks about a second category of women with whom you have a contract which is similar to a contract of marriage, but she has a lower status, in that you do not have an obligation to maintain her at parity with your wife. No. You maintain her at your level that you're capable of. Okay? Number 2, that your wife has inheritance rights, but she does not have inheritance rights now. And these are usually women who cannot get husbands, who need men to maintain them, care for them, who need to have intimacy, but don't want to commit sin. Okay? So the Quran refers to this second category as those whom your right hand possesses. What has happened in history is this has been identified with slavery. And the scholars of Islam who have bought that nonsense say, well, no slavery today, so this category is now gone, cold storage. But we are now trying to restore what is in the Quran. So we say you have a contract with her, and there is no limit to the number of women you can have in this category, the limit being your capacity to maintain. Your capacity to maintain. So instead of the woman having to go and search for a job, a low-paying job, and be exploited, sometimes have to give up her body to be able to get a job, and then come back home in the evening to maintain her children in a daycare center and so on. Instead of the woman having to face that life, she now has a man to maintain her, protect her, take care of her, and also to have intimacy with her. This is better than that life. She doesn't have the status of a wife, but this is better than being alone. So in our Muslim village, we'll have every woman who comes to the village, everyone who says, I want a husband, or I want to be in this relationship. In the case of marriage, you take a look at her and you say, well, I don't like the shape of her nose. Or I don't like the shape of her face or so. And you could decline, because your wife. You have a choice of saying yes or no. But not in category number 2. In category number 2, this is the woman who is in need of help. You have the need, you have the means to help her. You don't have to sleep with her. No. You can't say no to her.
Interesting.
Once you have the means to maintain her, you can't say no to her. You don't have to sleep with her. If she wants to have the sexual life, and you find yourself incapable of it, you can say to her, well, take a little time until I find someone, and I can get you married. Okay? But in the meantime, you have a roof, you have food, you have clothing, and you have protection and security. Yeah. So in our communities, we will be able to offer solutions to problems like these that other communities can benefit.
Interesting. And still on try to and how to avoid the other pitfalls, for example, internal fighting with each other, jealousy, all the traits that are plaguing human societies since the dawn of humans, of course. You see that because if I take an example, I've traveled a lot in many countries which are, at least officially, they're Islamic. And that's why I say that it's also part of the West. I don't see much more virtue or more behavior that is better than anywhere else. No. And you have the same problems, perhaps with even more hypocrisy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to be unfriendly to my friends in Morocco, Tunisia, Turkey. I don't know much that well Asia, but in Dubai or even in Saudi, who has this self-righteous. Often people have this self-righteous opinion of themselves. In reality, you see the same sloth and perversions and misbehaviors and greed and avarice as everywhere else in the world. How can we avoid to fall back into all these?
Well, the sinking ship is first of all for the malhama, the Western world. But that's not the end of the story. The Quran speaks about every town and every city becoming a sinking ship.
Yes.
And so our solution is, we can't solve your problems. Our way is to get out, to withdraw. Whether it be the Western world, or Morocco, or Algeria, or Tunisia, get out of the cities and move to the remote countryside. But having done that, We advise that if you want to have 3 or 4 wives, you should do a PhD in psychology. Because this is a part of human nature. This cannot be changed.
Yes.
This is part of being a human being. That there are going to be jealousies, and there are going to be rivalries. Even the Prophet himself, Allah's blessing be upon him, with his many wives. And he became so fed up with the bickerings that he decided to boycott all his wives for 1 month. And for 1 month he boycotted all his wives. And when the 29th day of the month came to an end, he then left his seclusion and went to his favorite wife, Aisha. She said, "Why have you come? The month is not yet ended." He said to her, "Aisha, sometimes the month has 29 days. This is the lunar month. And sometimes the lunar month has 30 days, okay?" So she was very petulant in her reply. "Why have you come? The month has not ended yet." So you will not be able to solve all problems in the village. It's not going to be such a utopia. This is part of life. This is part of life. Divorces will take place. Even in the Muslim village, there will be divorces. Quarrels will take place between husband and wife. Oh yes, it happens all the time. But you have to know how to deal with these problems. You must have mechanisms in place like divorce. In the case of the second category of women, the Quran says, make an agreement. In the event that she wants out of this contract, what are the conditions she has to fulfill? Similar to a divorce in a marriage, okay? So we will try our best in our small micro communities to restore life as it was once upon a time. But even once upon a time there were always problems.
One of the elements that always exists with humans is trade. People produce food and maybe want to trade some of that food with people who produce many manufactured goods. For example, he who makes shoes wants to trade and so on. One of the basic inventions of humans has been money. Money can be very useful, and as long as it's worth something, and it's recognized to be worth something. Today we live in a world where paper money is based on no real asset. And I, like you in my books and in your books, we are very fond of going back to the gold and silver as real money and value. Now, fortunately for us, we have not yet had the fate of people who are recently pushed for gold, like Gaddafi in Libya. And certainly it was part of the reason there was so much terrible attack on him. And Saddam Hussein as well tried to use gold for some of the trade, for petrol, for oil. And I believe we understand why there is so much anger at anyone who pushes back to go back to reality. Do you see gold and silver as being the money that is going to be used in the future in those villages?
My position is that unless we can restore real money, and real money does not have to be metals. If there's a shortage of gold and silver in the market, then in Medina the Prophet ﷺ would use dates as money, would use wheat as money, barley as money, salt as money. In the island of Java in Indonesia, you use rice as money. In Cuba, in the Caribbean, you'd use sugar as money. commodities of food consumption which have a shelf life, which are in abundant supply in the market, and which has intrinsic value, can be used as money. This is not barter, this is money. So our project of withdrawal from the cities would be a failure, catastrophic failure, if we do not in our micro communities restore real money. That is an absolute imperative of the Muslim village. Fortunately for us in this part of the world, dirhams and dinars already been minted. A young man from Switzerland out there is already part of the system of marketing dirhams and dinars. I have some inside the home. I could show you the dirhams. We have them in 1 dirham, in 2 dirham, in 3 dirhams, silver. And the technology is there now to mint it with precision. So it's easy today to get the coins and to use them. The problem is that the Articles of Agreement of the International Monetary Fund prohibit the use of gold and, by extension, silver as money. So any government which recognizes dinar and dirham as legal tender will be in violation of the obligations under the Articles of Agreement of the IMF. What do? Answer: you got to defy them. Yeah. The governments won't do that. So the people have to defy them. We have to proceed with our projects of building these micro markets in which we'll use the dirhams. We're building an institute of Islamic eschatology now in northern Malaysia. And we decided that our masjid must be built with only dirhams. We cannot use Malaysian money to build the masjid. So we have to find some weird means whereby we can pay the contractors in dirhams. We're already working on that. In those places where dirhams and dinars are not available or in short supply, then we say the alternative is to turn the commodities of food consumption, which have a shelf life, so we won't use mangoes, we won't use animals, which are in abundant supply, which have a shelf life, and which have intrinsic value.
Makes sense. I have two last questions, but one a little bit controversial perhaps. We have in Europe a very large population of people who are Muslim, and I think the vast majority are honest, hardworking, and as most people in the world, they want to take care of their family and have a happy life and try to work for a better future. Now, unfortunately, some people of that community, and I don't even think we can honestly say it's a community, but certainly some people who are moved to Europe or have been born into Europe from people who have origins from Middle East or North Africa, and claim to be Islam or following Islam, doesn't mean that they're necessarily following truth, misbehave in a very serious way. Some examples, for example, in the Nordic country, I can't remember if it's Norway or Sweden, but for example, there was a statistic where over a few years, 100% or very close to 100% of the rape, for example, were from people who were claiming to be Muslim on local Swedish or Norwegian women. And of course the media, when I understand the media gives always a distorted vision of those perhaps facts. And I wanted to have your opinion on this massive flow of people, which for many Europeans start to look like a colonization, or at least the perception is that. And I want you to have your opinion, because it strikes me when I've been traveling in the Middle East, and such things never happen. It doesn't happen in Algeria, it doesn't happen in Jordania, it doesn't happen. And suddenly it happens in Europe within those populations. Could it be they are misguided? Could it be they are lured? Could it be they believe into some sort of misguided holy war against European people? Certainly this is what a lot of Europeans perceive, and a growing number of Europeans perceive. And with a lot of people in Europe, we try to avoid what could be another reason for civil war or fighting. So what's your opinion on that?
My advice to those Muslims resident in Europe, in North America, at this time, is to make hijrah, go back home. Do not remain in Europe, particularly if you have children. And when you go back to Algeria and Morocco, Tunisia, don't go to the cities, go to the countryside. That appears to be the only way that you can survive with your faith intact, because the nose is tightening around your neck more and more. You have Muslims who prefer that their children should go to Islamic schools rather than state schools. And the law is now creeping to ensure that even in Islamic schools you've got to teach that there's nothing wrong with a man marrying another man. So already there in Canada. And if you want your child to be exposed to that, you should be shot. You're not a father and mother. No, you should be shot. So survival requires you to get off that ship, go back home. The problem is that most of these people who have left Algeria and Morocco and Tunisia and Pakistan and Bangladesh and so on have gone to Europe and the United States following a dream of wealth, a good life. So this is economic migration. And people who migrate for economic reasons usually have religion as a low category. So whatever changes they have to make in life, whatever modifications they have to make, they make it. So these can never be held up as examples of good Muslims, not at all. Increasingly they identify with the countries in which they are resident, and they refer to the American Armed Forces as our boys. They've gone to Iraq to kill your people in Iraq, and you still refer to them as our boys. They identify with the American Armed Forces. Patriotism. The Quran has warned about the Jewish-Christian alliance, which controls modern Western civilization, that if you turn to them with friendship and alliance, you belong to them. You left Islam. So for the purposes of the Quran, most of these are no longer recognized as Muslims now. They have left Islam and they identify themselves now with other people. So we can't solve their problems for them. But those who are still insistent on being faithful to Islam, for them we say the solution is go back home, make hijrah. The rest who remain behind, those are not our problem. We can't solve their problem.
Interesting. One of the corollaries to that is that more and more attacks on countries in the Middle East for natural resources are tried to be justified in the media, at least in my part of the world, and I guess everywhere, on trying to fight terror. And usually they say it's Islamic terror. This is not new. I'm sure that we can go back to 100 years ago and have the same kind of media reporting similar stories. How can people who live in Europe, for example, or North America, get away from that media influence?
Well, yesterday it was Bin Laden who was Mr. Terrorism par excellence. But Bin Laden's day has come and gone. And now the new Mr. Terrorism is Vladimir Putin.
He's not Muslim.
Vladimir Putin is Mr. Terror now. Okay? So they got to rewrite all their books on terrorism. The Russians are now the world's greatest terrorists. We're getting a little break now. The Muslims, yeah. The answer is whoever stands in their way, whoever is an obstacle and an impediment, whoever will not submit to them, they demonize you as a terrorist. And those who are faithful to Islam, like the Russian people, will not bow and submit to it. Russia is Rome in the Quran. The Quran has a whole chapter entitled Rome. And Rome is Orthodox Christianity. And they've been attacking Orthodox Christianity for a long, long time. Similar to the attacks on Islam. They began their attacks on Islam with the Crusades. The Crusades were not Christian wars. No. The Crusades were Western Christianity's wars, because Orthodox Christianity was not a part of it. So you can't paint the whole of Christianity with a brush that's coming from Rome. No. And when the Crusaders passed through Constantinople, they fought their own Christian brothers. Yeah, they fought their own Christian brothers. The Crusaders, on their way to Jerusalem. So the attack on Russia is similar to the attack of terrorism on Islam. What they did was that they were complicit in the rise of the Ottoman Empire, Western Christianity. They were complicit. They constantly had alliances with the Ottomans, Britain and France. And they used the Ottoman Empire to stab Orthodox Christianity in the back consistently for 500 years. They loved that. When the Ottoman army was about to conquer Constantinople, the Patriarch appealed to Rome for help. Rome replied and said, "We will help you on the condition you give up your Christianity and you accept ours." And Orthodox Christians replied and said, "We prefer the turban of the Sultan to the hat of the Cardinal." Yeah. So the attack on Russia was launched from that time of the Ottoman Empire. They used the Tatar Muslims in Crimea as slave raiders, raiding Russian villages, seizing people, enslaving them, and then selling them to the Ottomans. So the Ottomans will have a ready supply of slaves. So it was very magnanimous on Putin to then turn to the Crimean Tatars and say, "We will help you now. We'll help you." They're very magnanimous of them, because the Russians must be hating them, the Crimean Tatars. And then when they were about to take Jerusalem in 1917, the British army is about to take Jerusalem in November 1917. They want exclusive, there should be the exclusive voice to speak about affairs concerning the Holy Land. Okay? So they timed the October Bolshevik Revolution to deny Orthodox Christianity a voice. That's why the revolution took place in October. The revolution took place in October for a second reason. October 1917. Because Britain and France had a secret alliance with Russia in which they offered Constantinople to Russia. And when the Russian armed forces were within arm's length of Constantinople, they then stabbed Russia in the back. Because the Bolsheviks, as soon as they took over from the Russian monarchy, took Russia out of the war. For one reason, so that the Russian armed forces will not take Constantinople. That's why. Then they imposed communism and the Soviet Union, which set about destroying Orthodox Christianity. Okay? And so Russia suffered and suffered and suffered for all these years. And then in 1954 they handed over Crimea to Ukraine. Why? Because Israel was created 6 years earlier. And Israel's security is paramount. And the Russian fleet has been in Crimea for 200 years or more, 250 years. So the Russian fleet must get out of Crimea. So you hand Crimea over to Ukraine, 1954. And then came the time for the Zionist creation, the Soviet Union, to be dismantled. And they did it with their same color revolutions. But when the Soviet Union was dismantled, NATO can now creep and take over so many of these former states. NATO is expanding. The prize that NATO wants is Ukraine. That's the prize. When you couldn't get Ukraine through the front door, you get it through the back door, to a popular uprising. And as soon as you have the popular uprising, and you have a pro-Western government in Ukraine, you then move to checkmate. Checkmate is when Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. When Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, and NATO's armed forces are in Ukraine, then Ukraine will give Russia marching orders, get out of Crimea. That was the master plan. If that master plan had worked, Israel would have celebrated. Israel would have been celebrating. But they had their plans and he had his plans, the Lord God. And Russia responded brilliantly, and swiftly, without giving them any chance, within 2 weeks. And Crimea was back as Russian territory. Okay? The plan is to try to trap Russia now into acting recklessly in Ukraine to get cause us better. But Russia is not taking the bait. But Russia has been attacked. It's not just the world of Islam. It's Orthodox Christianity. The Second World War ended much earlier, but they kept it going. Why did they keep the Second World War going long after Germany had surrendered? Answer: because they wanted Stalin to take control of all of Rome, all the Orthodox Christian part of Europe that was not yet under control of the Soviet Union. They wanted the Soviet Union to take it all. That's why they kept the Second World War going. So it was all the time a crusade. This was a crusade against Eastern Orthodox Christianity. And this is a crusade against Islam, which has been going on for a long time. Because these are the two forces in the world that are going to stand up against them. The two forces in the world that will stand up against them are Rome and Islam.
Very last question, and because I take all too much of your time here, but I come from a very small country, Switzerland, in which you've studied.
It's 5 years. And I used to eat fondue in winter time.
Fondue and chocolate. We like that. How do you see, from your experience of Switzerland and from our little country, trying to be in the middle of Europe and trying to stay at the same time away from it, and how do you see, of course I'm trying to make my whole country to be a sustainable autonomous base, that's my goal. Not just myself, but the whole country, try to teach them, and so far it's quite advanced. How do you see Switzerland playing out from what you know in the coming difficult times ahead?
Well, I went to Switzerland and saw a fairyland of beauty. It was an absolute fairyland of beauty. And I am myself an amateur poet, and I felt that a land with such natural beauty should be producing poets and should be producing men and women of great spiritual eminence. Yeah.
Lots of bankers in Switzerland.
Instead, I went to Switzerland and I found the people who were far, far more interested in the Swiss franc.
It's true.
Yeah. It was a shocking experience for me. Shocking experience. Because I come across the Sudanese and I meet a lovely people, the Sudanese students. Lovely people, gentle, kind, with so much spirituality in them, so much consciousness of another world and so on. I meet the students of Kashmir, I find the same thing. I meet the Somali students, I find the same thing. So many people, but not the Swiss. It's as though something has died inside of them. That they need an internal revolution. They need an internal revolution in Switzerland. To teach them that there are things in life that money cannot buy.
Interesting.
Yeah. That once again, there's a hunger in the heart. A hunger in the heart. To reach out to a world beyond this world. The Indian poet Muhammad Iqbal says that beyond the stars there are so many worlds. If you're going to live your life confined to only this, will you not try to reach out to worlds beyond the stars? Meaning to elevate yourself to a higher standard of desire beyond the material world. Your approach of sustainable communities which are disconnected from the grid should strike a chord amongst the Swiss, because they are certainly very concerned about survival. Okay? And they have an experience, they have a history. The Swiss chalet up in the mountains, you have to store your food for winter time. Because for whole winter you won't be able to come down into the valley. So they have an experience of this kind of life, of self-sustaining life. What is needed is the internal revolution which allows you to see with internal signs, but otherwise cannot be seen. So you have this conjunction of the two oceans. But you already have it. It's there in your book.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
But you did all the questioning and you didn't give me any chance to ask.
Oh, if you'd like to ask me some questions, I'll be very happy.
I shared with you this prophecy of the Prophet of the river Euphrates and the mountain of gold. Would you ponder over it for a while and let me know whether you see anything more than what I have shared with you?
Of course, as you know, what I like in the exchanges, and of course I come here very humbly, first of all because I'm much younger and less knowledgeable than you are in many fields, and of course I always listen very humbly to people who have more experience in life. You're born the same year as my father, so I always respectfully listen to people. And when I hear some of what things you say, I wouldn't say sometimes, in some cases, my instinct would be, maybe I have some disagreement, but hopefully what I have as little bit of wisdom tells me first to think and research and learn before to argue. And certainly I'm not a big, I've read the Quran a few times, of course, because it's an important, I think anyone who wants to have any culture or knowledge should read the holy text of all religions to at least know a little bit. But I certainly have not read any hadith, so I'm always very hungry for knowledge. And life has taught me that impulsiveness often leads you to say silly things. So what is important to learn? What I know from my travels in the Middle East, and I traveled in Iraq, I traveled in every country in that part of the world, for example, teaches me that what we are told in the media in Europe or the West is not what happens in reality. And the reason the United States has been leading this grabbing of resources is linked to the fact that these resources are vital for them to continue their fake economy based on consumption. And what you say on Switzerland, for example, is very striking because there is some truth in it. We definitely are also a culture that is very materialistic. And while I have an analysis that comes from the materialistic world, I know that there is more in life than things. Actually, things are very little part of life. And sometimes we are owned by things that we own instead of mastering them and seeing them as for what they are, just little luxuries. But the reality is that humans have much more than that in life. And much more is more spiritual, is the friendship, is love, it's soul searching, it's that is more important. Maybe I discover this as I grow a little bit older and hopefully wiser. But the approach I try to teach people very humbly is to say that, and actually teach is perhaps not the right word, I tell people, and those who listen, listen, and those who don't listen, they don't listen. I don't try to convince people. I tell them that it makes mathematical sense that we are going to a collapse. Because our world is not sustainable, and the basic of what makes it real are disappearing. Resources, pollution, destruction of the environment, wars, the silliness of modern life, the destruction of the reality of what are men and women, the bogus finance. All of this is going to crumble and collapse like a house of cards very soon, and I agree with you, it's very soon. unfortunately, and maybe this is the, in Greek philosophy in the old days, they always spoke about trials, and when humans did mistake, they had to go through very difficult times to learn. And maybe it means death, maybe it means suffering for sure. But you only learn through painful experiences often in life. And so maybe we have to go through these difficult times to learn what is the truth, what is real about ourselves, about our relationship, about our friendships and people. And rediscover what was paradise, what was the paradise lost, right? What was given to us perhaps, and the earth was probably a paradise before, and maybe we have destroyed a lot of it, and we have to rediscover what it means to be part of this paradise. So what you describe as this mountain of gold is probably very something that makes me think about what it means, and certainly we need to rediscover what it all means.
Okay. One more question, and then I'd like to give a chance to my students if they have any comments or any questions to ask, and if you don't mind, of course, please discussing it with them as well. You asked whether we have an explanation that explains this awesome conclusion to which we are now arriving, where everything is imploding. And we gave an eschatological explanation. We said it's linked with the master plan for a Pax Judaica to replace Pax Americana, in the same way that Pax Americana replaced Pax Britannica. And all of this came in sequence in order that Israel might rule the world. And the evidence is already on the table that Israel is close. And that when Israel assumes the rule over the world, then a false Messiah will seek to claim to be the true Messiah. Upon which the time will then arrive for the true Messiah to return. When they said that we've killed him, the Quran says, no, you did not. You did not. And the Quran gave an explanation of how he survived. And then Allah raised him when they were returning. This is our eschatological explanation. If you share this explanation with us, well, then that will draw us closer to each other. But if you do not share with us this explanation, what is your explanation?
Spirituality, and of course the scripture. As I said, I was born baptized Catholic. So when I was a child, I was told that Jesus was the Messiah, and of course brought to mankind the truth of the Word of God. And of course, when I went through school, and then I did Catholic school, maybe I grew disenchanted with the church, which is not the same thing as the faith, the way I see it. So I always say to myself that I'm agnostic now, in the sense that I'm unsure what I know and unsure what I believe. And of course, our listeners know the difference between atheist and agnostic. Agnostic is someone who realizes that he's unsure, he doesn't know. Atheist is a belief that there is nothing. Yeah. I don't share that. I don't know. For sure, when one doesn't know, the reality means that I cannot have certainty of either one way or another. And it certainly means that I keep myself an open mind and an open heart on evolution of my beliefs and myself, and perhaps of dialogue, very open dialogue with people who have different faiths and different explanations. And if I'm here is also because I'm very much impressed with your eschatological analysis and view of because there's no coincidence. If from the texture and what you've read, you come to the same conclusions, which I believe are mathematical from my analysis. Right. This strikes me because it's when logic fits faith, and I must say that I've had the same discussions with people who have the very similar analysis from the Christian eschatology. And that's a lot of coincidences. And I think I write it in the beginning, in the introduction of my book, that it's troublesome. Troublant is the word in French. It's not troublesome. It's
troublant.
Troublant is in fact it's shaking your beliefs to suddenly see that from a cold materialistic approach, you have some people who believe almost the same thing from Christian and Islamic eschatology.
Okay.
So obviously it means we have put, if I say the finger, if I take the expression, the finger on something, into something. Here we are touching something that is deeply impacting our lives. And so of course, there is a lot that we could do to help people. Because a lot of people, I believe, are either in a very blind belief of some church, for example, which is very limiting. Or some people don't have the, as I said before, in those misbehaving people, for example, which believe that they are following some interpretation of a religion, but in fact they are doing some bad things. And I believe no religion tells you, no faith, no word of God should tell you to do evil things. That's, otherwise you are knowingly following an evil God, which doesn't sound possible for me.
Well, it's clear that you do not reject our Islamic eschatological explanation, and that you hold out the possibility that it can be valid, and there's much similarity between our Islamic eschatology and Orthodox Christian eschatology. Now let's open the door to our students. If any one of you have any comment to make or any question to ask. Where's Jalal? I'm not seeing him.
Okay.
Right, okay. And my two grandsons have not fallen asleep as yet. Gabriel, you also included.
I have no question pertaining to the books of Piero. However, I would like to know if, according to you, Piero, Malaysia can be a good place for a Sabbath, and if you think so, why?
Yes, Sabbath, what is Sabbath?
The sustainable autonomous base.
Okay.
So Islamic autonomous base in this case. Well, I do consulting for people sometimes. That's how I earn my living. To people have questions saying if what they're doing is okay, is it working? And so what I always look at is first of all the geography, and then the geopolitics, and of course the resources available, and the culture of the people. And it's my first time in Malaysia. It's the first time I'm in Kuala Lumpur, in this country. And certainly I look at my perception, and they're incomplete at this point. They're very. It's only the beginning of my impression. My first impression is that it seems to me a fairly peaceful country, a peaceful culture, because probably it has been for centuries a mix of people from, indeed, Malay, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, Chinese, influence from India, and some also influence from the West in more recent times. So, and it has been fairly, except of course there has been this Malayan insurgency in the 50s and 60s, but in early 60s, mostly 50s. It sounds to me that today the people are fairly peaceful in their relationship together, and there's a lot of tolerance between different cultures and religions. Perhaps even if I see some of the roads we passed last night, if I could see what was happening in some of the places inside those buildings, perhaps even there is too much tolerance in some cases, but I'm very open-minded, so I'm not judging. But certainly, the culture seems to be fairly peaceful, which is always good in when one looks at difficult times. Then comes the geography. Geography is, of course, Malaysia is at the very geostrategic part of the world. I don't know exactly what is the percentage, but it must be quite high. The percentage of oil that flows into tankers across the Malacca Strait, past Singapore and north to China and Japan must be quite significant. So this, and one should add the shipping of goods. So this part of the world is extremely strategic for whoever looks after control of the sea shipping lanes. And today the thalassocratic power is the United States, and it's so clearly this part of the world is very strategic for the United States, and one should see how much this part of the world would be left untouched if things go bad. And I would fear that with some oil resources, Malaysia is a prime target for the United States, or perhaps China in some cases, if they want to control these resources for their own unique consumption. One has to be careful about that. So there is some geostrategic threats that one has to consider. I cannot judge the government of Malaysia. I really don't know it yet. I don't understand yet the subtleties and the history there. In terms of geography also, what is interesting is I think you have mountains, you have rain, you have extremely good weather, extremely good weather patterns, so the food production and the water supply seems to me pretty good. Of course, there's 30 million people living in Malaysia. That's a lot. That's a big number. Is there enough food? Is it plentiful enough for 30 million people? That would require some research, especially if one takes into account a world with less resources to make the trucks and the tractors and the agriculture sustain at the level that it is now. Maybe it's possible. So, except Kuala Lumpur, which is a very large city, it seems to me also that the countryside has a lot of possibilities for indeed setting up villages or joining villages that can grow into sustainability and autonomy. And my instinct would say that from what I know now, if I consider the threats, the opportunities, and the advantages and disadvantages, so far I would balance, on the scale of things, it would be probably quite positive place. It would be a place where it's fairly positive to organize a good sustainability. Of course there's sea, so therefore there's fishing, which is very traditional here. So it is positive in my opinion, more positive than France or England, which are disaster happening, or North America for sure. So I would say to Malaysian people who look at us that this is probably the place they want to think to stay and make this effort to create their villages or to join a village, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay, there's a lot of red flags going on everywhere. So like the issue that you said that, the Muslims in Europe are creating havocs and all that, is that not another kind of, somebody putting in somebody just to create that kind of event?
Now, the way you phrased it, I would agree that I think there are a lot of people who are saying to us, but not just us, everywhere, they are saying Muslims are creating problems.
Media.
But what I said was that a lot of people who create problems claim to be Muslims in our countries, which is very different. And I said before that the vast majority of Muslims living in Europe are, as most people in the world, hardworking fathers and mothers and sons who work. And now I should add another point to what I said, is that in Europe, for example, and to some extent North America, we live in a system that also gives money to people, whatever they do. very socialist approach, which is an approach which is not like, it pretends to help, but it also enslaves. Because once you're a slave and you become a beggar, and you were not a beggar to start with, you moved there, and to move to a country you needed energy. My family is from Italy. We are originally from Italy, and we moved to Switzerland. It takes energy, and you want to go to work. And if you move to a place because you can become a beggar, and you will have a great life being a beggar, it means the system is forcing you to that. And then the system will tell you, if you're a beggar, it's because the evil white men are making you a beggar, and they don't want to give you a job because they are racist, which I believe is not true. But this is what they're also saying to these people. So my opinion is that the media, and who controls the media, are creating the problem which then they will use to make civil war. Because that's a way to divide and conquer. They will take a population in Europe, they will bring immigrants to lower the wages and to bring in people from a foreign culture and land and religion. They will make sure that most of them or some of them are becoming destitute and begging for social help. And then they will explain to them that the reason they are destitute is because people are racist, which I really believe they're not. The vast majority is certainly not. And then they will make the people, they will tell the people in Europe, see, these people are beggars, they don't work, they are parasites, and they're also criminals because some of them will become criminals. And they claim to be from Islam, and therefore Islam as a whole is criminal and bad and so on. And this is the perfect condition for civil war. Maybe they will take profit from that civil war, just as the same people take profit from all the wars, at least that I know of in the past centuries. All the wars, it's the same families who made profit from the banks and the big industries from all these wars. So the reason I asked the question was to try to understand why Muslim scholars, or certainly they don't, I'm sure they are, as the Sheikh here does, but they're not on main medias. And clearly the question includes the answer is because the media don't want to show peaceful position. They want to have, they want to show that there is anger and there is animosity and there is hate. And that's why they use this hate then to send these people to make so-called jihad in Syria and in Libya. And then they bring them back and they use them to shoot people in the street so that they maintain this tension. Again, coming from I can take a